Dear reader, this is another voice that time has almost silenced. A forgotten letter written by those who remain so that the story of those who left does not fade away. The winter of 1941 settled over Stalingrad like a closing fist, tightening day by day until breath itself felt rationed. The snow outside our somber school lay in hard drifts against the brick walls, untouched except for the wind that scoured it clean. Inside, the hallway stood in a quiet so complete it felt deliberate, as though silence itself had enrolled as a student here. The chalkboards kept their faint ghost smears of old lessons, fractions, spelling lists, a lopsided drawing of a cat someone had made during recess in better times. Even the radiators, once clanking like stubborn old men, had gone still. I walked those corridors every morning, brushing dust from the windowsills, straightening the abandoned coats left hanging like small, waiting ghosts. The children had been evacuated, some to the countryside, some farther still. Yet their echoes clung to the school like perfume, faint, stubborn, impossible to scrub away. A small, knitted mitten remained under the bench by the front door. A stack of readers sat crookedly on a desk, one page forever bent by a careless hand. Outside, the distant rumble of war thickened with each sunrise, but here in the school the absence was louder. It was a silence that felt like holding your breath for too long. And each time I passed the row of desks belonging to my class, I wondered where each small life had been scattered, what roads they traveled, what fear they carried, what they still dreamed of in the dark. And I wondered too, when a place built for growing suddenly becomes a place for remembering, what remains of the voices that once filled it. My name is Anya Sokolova, a school teacher in the Dzerzhinsky district of Stalingrad. I taught a class of 22 children, bright, stubborn, endlessly curious souls who insisted on learning even when paper was scarce and pencils worn thin. Among them was little Mitya Barinov, a boy whose quiet smile always seemed one breath away from laughter. He loved drawing maps more than arithmetic, and he believed he could chart a way for his father to return safely from the front. When the evacuations began, my students were bundled onto trains, some crying, some brave, all far too small to carry the weight asked of them. Mitya was among the last to leave. He pressed his half-finished drawing, a map of the Volga, to my hand before stepping onto the crowded rail car. The school has been mostly empty since then. Empty classrooms, empty hallways, empty stairwells echoing with memories instead of footsteps. Yet I return each day, sweeping the floors, dusting the shelves, straightening the desks, as if the children might burst in at any moment, cheeks pink from the cold, eager to learn. I write now to remember one child among many, because even in a city devoured by war, a single small life should not be lost to silence. The memory that returns to me first, unbidden and warm against the cold present, is of a late autumn afternoon, only weeks before everything changed. The light slanted across the schoolyard in long amber ribbons, catching on the last stubborn leaves that clung to the birches. The children were restless that day, their boots tracking in bits of frost as they came inside, cheeks glowing, arms full of fallen branches they imagined were swords, wands, and musical staffs. Mitya trailed behind them, clutching his satchel against his chest. His cap sat crooked on his head, always just a little too large, and his scarf had come undone again, the ends dragging like tails behind him. When he finally reached his desk, he placed his satchel down with unusual care and withdrew a folded piece of paper, smoothing it out as though it were something fragile and precious. "Teacher," he said softly, holding it out to me with both hands, "I finished the river." I knelt beside him to take a closer look. His map was not to scale, not even close, but it carried a strange and touching logic. The Volga, drawn like a blue ribbon looping gently across the page, the school marked as a tiny square with smoke curling cheerfully from its chimney. His house, another small square, sat farther along the riverbank, and he had drawn a path between the two places dotted with little circles. "These are safe spots," he explained, "for when Papa comes home and the city looks different, so he won't be lost." There was no way to correct this, no lesson plan that fit such tender thinking. So I told him it was beautiful, and it was. That afternoon, as the others practiced their handwriting or whispered stories to one another when they thought I wasn't listening, Mitya kept working on his map. He sharpened his stub of a pencil again and again until it resembled a needle, and he shaded the river in tiny strokes, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Every so often he paused to look out the window, as if measuring the real river against the one in his drawing. When the final bell rang, the children dashed out to greet their parents or to race home before dusk. Mitya was slower, as always. He folded his map with the same careful hands, slipped it inside his satchel, and pulled on his too large cap. Before leaving, he turned back to give me a small nod of farewell, a gesture he must have learned from his father. It made him look solemn, older than his years. I watched him walk down the path toward the river, his scarf trailing behind him once more. For reasons I couldn't name then, I lingered at the window longer that day, watching until he disappeared around the bend. Later, when the evacuations came and the air grew thick with rumors and dread, I thought of that map, of the safe spots he imagined into being, of his child's belief that the world, though shaken, could still be navigated if one only drew it carefully enough. That memory is the first warm ember I hold against the winter that followed. The weeks that followed grew colder, not only in temperature, but in spirit, as though the city itself sensed the approach of something vast and unstoppable. Supplies grew thin. The chalk we used in class crumbled quicker than before, and the paper, already scarce, became something we rationed like medicine. Yet the children adapted with a resilience that humbled me. They practiced multiplication on slates, sketched drawings in the margins of old newspapers, and used the backs of ration cards to write little stories, jokes, and messages they passed to one another when they thought I wasn't looking. In those days, I found myself constantly watching them, half proud, half afraid. Their laughter, when it came, felt almost defiant, a warm pulse in an air that was turning brittle. Mitya, for his part, became quieter. Not sad exactly, but focused in the way children sometimes become when they sense the world shifting around them. He still worked on his maps, though now they were layered with details. Small circles marking checkpoints, arrows pointing to imagined shelters, tiny stars showing where he believed his father might first appear when returning from the front. He showed them to me during recess, when the other children ran outside to chase the weak sunlight. Each time he unfolded a new map, I felt a tug at something deep inside me. I saw the careful lines he drew to try to mend the fractures forming in his world, as though he could hold his family together with pencil strokes alone. And I knew, I think all of us knew, that children often understood danger long before they were told its name. One afternoon, after a particularly loud report of artillery in the distance, I found him sitting in the coat room, staring at his hands. The room smelled faintly of wool and damp boots. I crouched beside him. "Are you frightened, Mitya?" I asked gently. He shook his head at first, then hesitated, then nodded once. "But I am also thinking," he whispered. "About what?" "About how to make the school a safe spot too." His small voice wavered, though he fought to keep it steady. "You already have," I told him. "You made it safe by being here." He looked up at me then, eyes round and searching, and in that moment he seemed suddenly very young. It struck me how children could carry such impossible hope inside bodies so small, hope that stubbornly persisted even when the adults around them grew weary. On the last day before the evacuations, the children arrived bundled in extra layers, their parents hovering at the doorways with anxious eyes. The hallways filled with a restless, expectant hush. I tried to lead a final lesson, but the children were too distracted. Even the chalk felt reluctant in my hand. They sensed something approaching, something that would scatter them like leaves in the wind. When the announcement came, brief and official, I watched as mothers clutched their children tightly, as fathers gave hurried instructions, as the children themselves looked from one adult to another, as though searching for someone to say it wasn't true. Mitya approached me with his satchel hugged close to his chest. He reached inside and pulled out a map. One last map, drawn quickly, the lines uneven but full of urgency. "This one is for you," he said, "so you will know where to go if the city changes." I tried to respond, but found no words, so I only took the map and folded it gently, mirroring the care he had shown every day. That moment, his small hand pressing hope into my palm, is one I still carry with me long after the echoes of war swallowed the school's laughter whole. After the children were taken away, the school became a hollow body. The wind slipped through cracks in the windows, stirring the curtains like tired ghosts. Chalk dust settled over everything, desks, chairs, the stacks of abandoned readers, as if the building was slowly being buried in quiet. I swept the floors each morning out of habit, though no small boots tracked mud or snow across them anymore. The broom's bristles made the only sound, a soft scrape that reminded me painfully of the whisper of pages turned by eager hands. Outside, the war crept closer. You could feel it before you heard it, an uneasy heaviness that clung to the air. Then came the distant thrum of artillery, the rattling windows, the nervous glances exchanged between neighbors who no longer bothered with forced smiles. The Volga itself seemed to tense, its currents tugging sharply as if trying to flee. I often found myself standing in my empty classroom, the silence pressing against my ears. It was not the gentle quiet of focused study, but a heavy, suffocating kind, thick with what was missing. The desks looked wrong without children, too large, too orderly, too still. I would trace my fingers along the grooves carved into the wood. Initials, doodles, the faint remains of a tic-tac-toe game left unfinished. A fragment of laughter seemed trapped there, waiting for the chance to be set free again. But the absence I felt most sharply was Mitya's. His desk remained just as he left it, a small chip missing from the corner where he always rested his elbow, a bit of pencil lead embedded near the top from a moment of excited drawing. The space felt incomplete without his quiet concentration, without the soft rustle of his maps unfolding. As the siege grew nearer, the city tightened itself like a wounded animal. Crowds gathered at the riverbank, desperate for news, for shelter, for a way out. Rumors flew like sparrows, quick, frantic, impossible to catch. I searched for word of the evacuated children, hoping for some confirmation that they were safe. None came. Instead, new lists appeared, lists of the injured, the missing, the fallen. I scanned them reluctantly, fearing a name I knew might slip through the ink. One cold morning, a soldier stopped by the school. He was young. The war had already carved deep lines around his eyes. He carried a bundle of items left behind in the evacuation, mittens, notebooks, a cracked pair of spectacles. He handed them to me without ceremony. "These belong to your students," he said. I sifted through the small pile, each object a whisper of a child's presence. A mitten with a frayed cuff, a reader with pages worn thin, and then, folded neatly, as if waiting for its owner, a fragment of a map, edges softened from constant handling. It was not one I recognized. "Found this near one of the trains," the soldier explained. "Thought it might mean something." The map trembled in my hands. The river was there, drawn in shaky blue strokes, and a small square marked near the bottom, unlabeled but unmistakably my school. A dotted path led away from it, trailing off the page, unfinished. I pressed the map to my chest. War had taken many things from our city, but this small, fragile piece of a child's hope felt like a wound, deeper than any shell could carve. It was then I realized the truth that still haunts me. Absence is not quiet. It is a roar with no voice. Time in a besieged city does not move the way it does elsewhere. Days become long stretches of waiting. Nights become chambers of listening for sounds you fear and sounds you hope for. The school, once my anchor, became a place suspended outside time altogether. I still visited each morning, brushing away the thin layer of frost that crept along the window panes, warming my hands over the brittle pages of the children's abandoned books. It was a ritual that grounded me when everything else felt uncertain. One morning, as I stepped into the classroom, a ray of pale winter sunlight cut across the room, illuminating the dust motes drifting slowly through the air. For a moment, the place looked almost golden, like the memory of a memory. It softened something inside me. I sat at Mitya's desk, tracing the line where his small forearm once rested, and felt the faintest sense of presence, not loud or sudden, but like the warmth left in a scarf just removed. I unfolded the map the soldier had given me. The creases were deep, and one corner had torn away, but the fragile strokes remained. I studied the half-drawn path that wandered toward the edge of the page, unfinished. It struck me then that perhaps it was meant to be unfinished. Perhaps the path was still being walked somewhere far from Stalingrad, in a place where the sound of artillery never reached. That thought warmed me more than the weak sunlight could, so I gathered the children's belongings, the mitten, the broken spectacles, the notebooks, and placed them carefully inside one of the wooden cabinets. Not to hide them, but to keep them safe. I added Mitya's map last, smoothing it gently before letting it rest among the other fragments of young lives interrupted too soon. It felt like building a small sanctuary inside the school, a place where the children's voices could linger freely, untouched by the harshness outside. As the siege tightened, the city adapted in ways that were both heartbreaking and immeasurably brave. Neighbors shared what little they had, strangers became protectors, and those who remained learned to carry grief not as a crushing weight, but as a quiet companion. I found myself doing the same. Each day I swept the floors, whispered a few words into the silent classroom, words I hoped the walls remembered, and slowly, very slowly, the sharp edges of loss softened into something I could hold without trembling. One evening, as I locked the school door behind me, the sky blazed in streaks of red and gold, colors almost too beautiful for a city at war. I paused, breath catching in my throat, because for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not a surrender, but an acceptance that remembering was its own form of resistance, that as long as I carried the children's stories, they would not vanish into the smoke and rubble. And among those stories, the one that pulsed brightest was Mitya's, the boy who drew maps to keep his father from being lost, who gave me one so I would not be either. I realized then that his unfinished path had given me my own, the path of remembering, of witnessing, of writing, so that small voices might continue to echo long after the world expected them to fade. In that realization, the school no longer felt empty. It felt full of echoes, full of warmth, full of lives that had touched mine forever. Dear reader, as I close this letter, I trace once more the soft, wavering line of Mitya's unfinished map. Its path ends abruptly, but its meaning does not. It leads me still through silence, through memory, through all the fragile places where hope tries to live. And I wonder, as I fold it gently, when a child draws a path for others to follow, is it ever truly lost, even when the world around them is? Thank you for listening to this small voice from a long ago winter. If this story touched you, I invite you, quietly, gently, to like and subscribe to the channel, so more forgotten letters may find their way back into the light.